Our final talk of the day is Arcadi Navarro from the Center for Genomic Regulation and EBI.
Okay, so thanks to the organizers for existing, I would say, not necessarily for inviting me. This is being a cool meeting. I'm learning a lot, and as soon as I learn how to pass slides with this, I will start my talk. This is being done by someone else, not by me, I promise, not pressing those buttons. Anyway, so this is the outline. I'll try to attach to those 10 minutes, but given that we are the Global Alliance for Catching Up with Time, apparently, we are not as stressed as we were about an hour ago. So I'll try to comply. Essentially, I'm going to present two things. First, what we did with the European Genome Phenome Archive. And as most of you know, the European Genome and Phenome Archive is kind of the equivalent to the DVGAP. Essentially, what we've got is a bunch of data, approaching 1.7 petabytes now, a bunch of studies from all the technologies and all the potential diseases that you can imagine, and it contains genome and phenome information that essentially has to be kept secure because all the heterogeneous consents different patients have signed to give their data for research. But of course, as you know, this data also has to be distributed to researchers. So in order to do that, we actually manage this database, which is, I insist, the European equivalent to the DVGAP with all the European differences, like the fact that we speak over 30 languages or so, right? So at the moment, and those are kind of provisional figures, they keep changing, we have about 500,000 people, 1.7 petabytes, and all different sorts of informations. The data there is data that belongs to smaller scale studies, but also most of the dominant data sets can be accessed through the EGA, and actually the EGA mirrors the DVGAP and vice versa. So data get visualized, and data users, people who might be interested in the data, can easily know what they want, and in principle can easily know how to access it, right? Now, this is an issue because this is a big data set that was created by the EBI, the European Bioinformatics Institute, and a couple of years ago, we decided that this was going to be federated. And this is the kind of problem the Global Alliance is facing. How to get resources that are kind of, built upon a certain site and distribute these resources about. And well, one of the advantages is that, of course, the EBI had lots of experience. We did have some knowledge plus the pitch, which is good. And there was a bunch of people, some of them are here, that collaborated and worked hard. And those are three important things: knowledge, people, and perhaps the pitch, right? Some of the faces are here, but damn, that was a fine joke. So how did these people that are here, that you can see, went about this problem? Well, the first thing they did is that they realized that they are not the first bunch of people to face this kind of problem. I mean, Tony Stark already faced this kind of problem. He was a cool guy, millionaire, doing wonderful things, but he had lots of dependencies, right? He couldn't move a lot because he had all these cables hanging from him that would hook him to energy sources and so on and so forth. And you could not get Tony Stark out of the room or to a big party and so on and so forth. So the way to go about this was first to get almost ex novo a bunch of modular parts. You understand what your system does, and you create parts that can interact with each other in a standard way, but are modular. And you create them independently. This is interesting because then you start realizing that your system actually has different parts of it that could actually work independently, if you will. And after doing that, you just, wrap this up with a standard, an innovative interface, and you can go about, fly and kick some ass. We don't plan to kick ass. we just plan to fly. But this is kind of interesting because that's exactly what we did, right? The EGA 2.0 architecture that has been created over the last few years actually maintains the same service. It's totally transparent for users that this actually has happened, but But we still have a submission portal. We have all this interaction with the EGA databases. But the internal organization is modules that are microservices, right? And essentially, microservices are wonderful for federation, as you know, because, well, they are Java-based. They have these interfaces, REST interfaces. They are embedded in web servers. They interact with SQL or non-SQL databases, and they can communicate asynchronously, which is great, because if you are in several places at the same time, sometimes things happen with the internet, as we have noticed in this room over the last couple of years. So, days, sorry. Anyway, so after doing all that, essentially you have a catalog of microservices, equivalent to the catalog of pieces that Tony Stark had. And essentially, what you do is to build those pieces. Interestingly, what you realize is you don't need to build the whole Iron Man suit. You can build part of it. And this is quite real, actually. This is a real guy who lost an arm, and actually Tony Stark, somebody with a 3D printer, printed for him an Iron Man arm and gave this Iron Man arm to this kid, right? And this is now possible. One can get all these modules and create packages that do the stuff. And that's exactly the plan for the next few years. And this is something that we intend to do within Accelerate, within Elixir. Elixir is the European Life Science Infrastructure. And there's this grant to consolidate databases and to federate them. And the plan is, well, there's data being generated. This data is being sent to different databases. Some of them are, non-secure data. ENA deals with that. EGA deals with the secure data. This data needs to be brought to users, and then we have the GA4GH APIs all over the place. And some of these users maybe want to have some local instance of the EGA so they can play with it. And this is what we are trying to build, the local EGA made easy, legacy, if you will. And then all sorts of Global Alliance initiatives can be beneficial here. We can benefit from secure compute clouds, some of them presented earlier today. We can benefit from federated authentication systems, and all of this allows coordinating services and making the experience of the users easier and generating this sustainable, not aggregated, but federated data set, right? Now, those are the things that are going on our side now. I mean, a pilot of Elixir was finished, EGA as a joint venture. Some of them are ongoing, Accelerate is ongoing. The trade actually has to do with the Netherlands. Perhaps somebody in the room is here. The beacon, already Ewan this morning, and David later on explained that we did light a beacon with 3 levels of security because we have kind of 3 levels of data. And, well, we are running pilots with the Rare Disease Consortium and so on and so forth, right? That's what's going on, and that's our response to one of the challenges. And I think that we have been surprisingly successful at it. I wouldn't say remarkably, I would say surprisingly, because really by 2013, I did not expect that all these could have been achieved in a year and a half or 2 years, right? Now, one second really relevant point is that there's another challenge. We are getting all this data and we're distributing all this data. And perhaps we are paying less attention than we should to metadata. I mean, all these EGA studies have been published in a number of journals. And the procedure is people see one study in a journal or while browsing the internet, and there's a bunch of interesting things. And then they request the data. And those are requesters from our data coming from all over the world, right? And in order to, get this data, they have to go through a process. But once they get it, they probably want to aggregate it with different studies, or perhaps aggregate it with their own data. Because the whole goal is that all this data is something that we want to share, right? The thing is that when the process of sharing starts, perhaps things are not that easy. As John said this morning, sharing relies on good metadata. And the question is, when one starts thinking at looking at the metadata that we ask users to submit is kind of very flexible. There's a bunch of XLM documents that are not restrictive at all, so people can submit pretty much what they want. The whole goal is that we want a rich set of metadata because the metadata being rich allows sharing, right? And one problem we face is that sometimes people submit the bare minimum. Not all the time. Most people do decent work, but some people do submit the bare minimum. Incredibly, even they create tags that they don't fill up, which is equivalent to giving you a parcel with a ribbon as a present and the parcel being empty. That's something that we do need to correct, right? And we're trying to do that. And we're trying to think that this needs to be linked with other very interesting initiatives like biosamples and other similars. I mean, the biobank information there is going to be very important. All the healthcare patient system there is going to be very important because the genomics information needs to be linked with rich metadata and rich phenomics information. And essentially, because the scarcity of good metadata hinders, which is one of our main goals, which is to make data fully findable, fully accessible, fully interoperable, and fully reusable, we are trying to create a submission task force that will focus on easing submission and easing metadata and creating the right incentives, right? We want easy submission, we want cross-linking information to stable databases so submitters get their data enriched at the moment of submitting. We can light by beacons and we can even consider matchmakers, even though it's a bit more difficult. And we are essentially trying to give people more bang for their bucks. And that's it, thanks very much.
All right, I think I want to thank you all. I know that we're running very, very late today, so I think we should wrap up our panel and thank all of our 5 presenters. I beg your pardon? Oh, I didn't see any questions. I didn't see any questions, and I. Sure. Do we have questions? Okay. All right.
Hi, I'm Ramon Feliciano from Ingenuity, now Kaizen. I was wondering, your third point, challenge around cleaning up metadata really resonated. I was wondering if you had thoughts about how to do that, how to sort of guide. At some point, it's typically you're sort of trying to either convince or trick a user into behaving and entering data in a more clean and consistent fashion, and that's less of a computational challenge, or it's at least as much of a design challenge of the tools we put in front of such users as it is a sort of traditional computer science challenge.
So there are several answers to that. Some of them involve the European Commission and writing laws about it. But at the end of the day, what I tend to believe is that one should get submitters hold their hands and help them through the process. And if you do that, you end up realizing that submitters actually can do a good job in preparing very nice, actually better, more reusable submissions. And some of the pilots we are running have to do with that, right? So that's one kind of answer.
When you say hold their hands, do you mean have people on your staff that are going to go out and essentially be sort of the tour guide for the submitter and walk them through the process?
That's part of the answer, but then one wants to automatize this process as well. So there's many things. That would be one answer. Another potential answer would be try to make sure that when submitters submit data, they don't just submit and that's it and get to publish because they get their accession number. Data gets enriched somehow, and the process of submission may be part of the process of research if we manage to enrich data. For example, one can get array data and at the process of submitting, impute it somehow, annotate variants better. This kind of stuff is a possibility, but that has an even higher cost in terms of staff. But we are exploring all this because this does need an answer.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. Do you require submitters who have access to data to return their enriched data to you?
Nope. No. So we can contact them and ask them to do so, but no. Once submitters have submitted, they are, so to speak, off the hook.
Okay, thank you.
All right. I want to thank Arcadi and all the 5 of our speakers. Why don't we give them all a round of applause?